Hello everyone and welcome to the Wild Side with Wildlife SOS, and I'm Kartick Satyanarayan. Joining us today is a scientist who's dedicated her life to conservation research and protection of wildlife. She's currently working on bringing back the almost extinct northern white rhino. She's the director of reproductive physiology at the Institute for Conservation Research at the San Diego Zoo in California. She's also been a huge supporter of Wildlife SOS for several years and has been actively involved with our research team on sloth bears. Here's presenting a compassionate scientist with many, many feathers in her cap and also a dear friend, Dr. Barbara Durrant. Hi, Barbara. It's lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's nice to see you.
I hope you're keeping well and safe. How are you dealing with the pandemic and the lockdown?
Well, it's everyone's safe here. Our labs were closed down, which put us a little bit behind, but we're opening back up slowly. At home, I have my computers and my dogs and my beautiful backyard. And so things have been going well. There's a lot of work to do that can be done at home.
Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for all of the incredible work that you've been doing all these years. I'm sure we could be sitting here all day long if I start listing your achievements, but thank you for what you've been doing. We need more people like you.
Well, thank you, Kartick. I've had a wonderful career. I couldn't have asked for something more fulfilling and more important to do with my life. I feel very, very lucky in having this career and having the collaborators like Wildlife SOS that I've had through my career.
I've always wanted to ask you, what inclined you to choose this path of wildlife research and science?
I went to school to study animal science, but I didn't want to work with domestic animals or livestock animals that were going to be grown up and then sent to the slaughterhouse. That was not what I wanted to do with my life. So I got into a reproductive physiology lab and realized that embryos were the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. They're so perfect, so round, and just so beautiful. And so I went into the field of reproduction. And everything that I learned in my graduate studies was, of course, on domestic animals. But I was always in the back of my mind thinking, how can I apply this to cheetahs and rhinos and antelope and birds and lizards? How can I apply this? And I was so lucky to be able to do a postdoctoral fellowship at the zoo where I was working with armadillos, and then branched out from there and started working with a variety of species, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians. And it's endlessly fascinating to study the reproductive processes of all these different species. They're all a little bit different. And so we have to start from scratch with every new species. And it's just, there couldn't be anything that's more fulfilling or more interesting and more fascinating.
It's fantastic that you're doing such incredible work at the Institute for Conservation Research. But can you tell me a little bit about the mission and values of your institute?
Yes, the Institute is a research organization, and we are dedicated to gathering basic information, data, doing controlled studies, and disseminating that information for the advancement of conservation of endangered species. So all of the species that we work with are exotic. Some are more endangered than others. Some are almost extinct. So that's the mission, is to do science-based conservation, develop the science of saving species.
Barbara, I know you established the germ plasm repository in the frozen zoo at the Institute for Conservation Research. What exactly is a germ plasm repository?
Well, germplasm is an overall term for sperm, eggs, and embryos, but also reproductive tissues. So the very first sample that I froze for the frozen zoo was an 8-ax antelope. I froze semen from an 8-ax antelope, and that was way back in 1980. And that was the first germplasm sample in the frozen zoo. Now we have tens of thousands of samples of sperm, eggs, embryos. of almost 1,000 different species. So it's the largest biobank of its kind anywhere in the world.
That's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about the frozen zoo and biobanking?
Well, the Frozen Zoo was established in 1975 by Dr. Kurt Benershka, and he realized that we had to save the genetic diversity at the time, because every day we have less genetic diversity in the world as species numbers decrease, as species go extinct. And he realized that way back in 1975 and said, we have to save this genetic material, even if we don't know how we're going to use it in the future. He couldn't have even dreamed back in 1975 of some of the processes that we have now. For example, taking some of those skin cells that he froze that are still in the frozen zoo, now we can take them out of the freezer, transform them into stem cells, and redirect their differentiation. And that's exactly what we're doing with some of these cells. And the ultimate goal is to redirect them into sperm and eggs, so that we can then use those formerly skin cells to make new embryos and new individuals.
It's lovely to know that you lead a team at the Institute with such a great vision. But I've also learned that you're personally responsible for the birth of 2 southern white rhino calves at the Rhino Rescue Center. How on earth did you do that?
Well, I didn't actually give birth to them myself, you know. The mothers did that. But we have a wonderful team that is comprised my group in reproductive sciences, but also a fantastic team of veterinarians and the wildlife care specialists who care for these animals every day. Those people are also trainers, professional trainers, and they have trained 6 southern white rhinos that we imported from South Africa, so that we are able to get very close to them and are able to do ultrasound exams, and we actually were able to do artificial insemination. We timed the ovulation of the female so that we knew exactly when to do the artificial insemination, and then we were able to follow the growth of those fetuses all the way through gestation. And then the actual moment of birth is all very scientific and serious up until that point. And the moment that each of those females gave birth, of course, we all were cheering and laughing and crying, and it was just such a huge emotional result of all of our work. And a baby rhino is about the cutest thing I've ever seen. They were the first calves from artificial insemination born in North America, and only the second one born from frozen semen in the world.
Amazing. You know, the last time I visited your institute in San Diego and came across to meet you, I found you with your arm deep inside a rhino as you were in the middle of an ultrasound procedure. What does it feel like to have your arm inside a rhino doing a transrectal ultrasound?
Well, you know, if it's a cold day, it feels really good. But it actually feels amazing that these animals trust me enough and are calm enough. So the wildlife care specialist is feeding the animal at the other end and talking to the animal, and they know me very well. They know my voice, and it feels like a tremendous privilege that an animal trusts you enough to allow you to do this. And so, yes, we are in up to our shoulder and reaching very far. The ovaries are about 4 feet away from us on the inside. So it's kind of a messy procedure, as you might expect from a transrectal ultrasound. But we actually can visualize their whole reproductive tract, including their ovaries, and we can see what's growing on their ovaries and when do they ovulate, or when are they going to ovulate. And so we've got tremendous data from these animals like no one has ever been able to get before, because we have all these animals that allow us to do this.
Barbara, you visited Wildlife SOS facilities in India multiple times.
Yes.
What was your experience like?
The first time I was in Wildlife SOS, we were at the Agra Bear facility, and I was there with a couple of other people from the Institute. And we were there to explore the possibility of collaborating with Wildlife SOS. And I was, first of all, I love bears, as you can tell from the picture behind me. And to work with sloth bears was so exciting. And just walking around the facility and talking to you and Gita and some of your staff, and just the dedication that we felt from you and all of the people there, all of your staff, and seeing these animals that had been so tortured and mistreated, and seeing them actually come up to be close to the people and interacting and not being afraid, and to see that their coats, their beautiful coats, you know, shiny, they were so healthy and strong, and just listening to everyone and their sincere lifelong dedication to these animals struck us to the heart. And we knew that we wanted to be part of this organization and work with this organization of Wildlife SOS. And that was the beginning. I also was very impressed with the quality of your facilities. Wildlife SOS has these large, beautiful enclosures with lots of interactive things for the animals to do, a lot of enrichment. And it was such a pleasure to see these animals in these conditions, and to know that there were no more dancing bears. This is a boots on the ground organization that's doing real, tangible conservation. So we were sold, we went back and we said, we have to work with this organization. And we've been working closely with you ever since.
Thank you for that. Barbara, I know you worked with a number of bear species, including giant pandas. Can you tell us a little bit about breeding pandas?
Yes, breeding pandas is not as easy as it might sound. Because they're solitary in the wild, in San Diego, we kept our male and our female separate until just before the breeding season. And then we would switch their enclosures so that they would get the scent of each other. And then we were measuring hormones on the female. We were watching the behavior very, very closely. We were looking at the changes of the cells in the female's reproductive tract. She allowed us to do this through very good training. And so every day the group would meet and we'd say, okay, what do her hormones look like? What do her cells look like? What does the behavior look like? How is the male behaving? And then we would make a group decision about whether we were going to open a solid door between the two enclosures so that they just had a fence between them. And then we would watch, and then everybody would gather and we'd say, okay, shall we open the door? Because they're carnivores and they do fight. And if we made a mistake on the timing, we could cause some real problems. There could be some real aggression. So we all had to agree. The keepers were standing by with fire hoses and alarms, and we were all crossing our fingers and saying a little prayer. And we opened the gate, and the male came in, and the male was quite a bit smaller than our female, and he had orientation problems, if you can visualize that. And it took them a very, very long time to actually get coordinated enough to breed. And when they finally did get in the right position, we weren't sure if he was accomplishing what we hoped he was accomplishing. And so we were practically standing on our heads to see if the orientation was correct. And it was. And he bred one time, and then we separated them because there was a little aggression. And the next day, this male who had never bred before that day, he was so exhausted that he refused to go to the female the next day. And so we wondered if a single breeding was going to be enough. And so I actually did artificial insemination the next day with semen from a different male, just because the female was still ready, still in estrus. And when the cub was born, then we did DNA analysis, and sure enough, it was from that single breeding.
That's amazing. What a story. Barbara, you also worked with snakes, I understand, including rattlesnakes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I had a graduate student from Brazil who was very interested in rattlesnakes. And on the grounds of the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, we have 16 species of snakes. 3 of them are rattlesnake species. So in the summertime, when the rattlesnakes were out and about, we would go out about 10 o'clock at night, because in the heat of the day here, it gets very hot during the day. So in the heat of the day, the snakes are not out. So we would go around 10 o'clock at night and with spotlights, and we'd find these rattlesnakes, and we'd take GPS coordinates of them, bring them back to the lab, and we would do a little bit of a local anesthetic around the cloaca, and we would collect semen, and then we would take those snakes right back to the exact place using the GPS coordinates. We take them back and release them exactly where we had found them, because we knew from previous studies that these snakes, actually all snakes, if you return them, if you relocate them very far out away from their native territory, they will not survive. So we're very careful to do that. And we learned then through that study how to freeze semen from rattlesnakes.
That took quite some effort. That's amazing. Barbara, I wanted to talk about elephants very briefly. Ever since we had our success with the sloth bears, we've started working to protect Asian elephants. And India, as you know, is the last stronghold for the wild Asian elephant population. But while we are, actively working to stop illegal trafficking of elephant calves, is also a big issue in India where a lot of the trafficking happens in order to get elephants into captivity and then use them for temples and rides for tourists and things like that. And in order to tackle that, Wildlife SOS has a campaign called Refuse to Ride, and we've been trying to create awareness about what happens to these beautiful beasts and why people should not be riding them. What are your thoughts about that?
I think this is a very, very important initiative of Wildlife SOS. It's so important that you're telling us, that you're telling tourists and others what happens to these animals, because we don't know. And without being educated, we're making the wrong decisions by riding these animals and perpetuating this. Now, educating the public, educating tourists, educating people in your country who might not know the origin of these animals is so important. And also you bringing some of these animals, temple elephants, some of these begging elephants, into your facilities. I had the privilege of going to your elephant facility a few years ago and watching these animals walk down through the field of dreams into the river, and just watching them enjoy themselves in the water with a companion elephant, and just to see how they're now in their native element. They were free, they were walking freely, they were swimming and cavorting and snorkeling in the river, and it was just the most wonderful thing to see. And visiting the hospital where their wounds could be cared for. It was a wonderful experience, and I think the work that you're doing, I can't say enough about the work you're doing for the elephants.
Thank you for sharing that, Barbara. That's very inspirational. I'm now going to move us to the next segment of the show, which we call Elephant in the Room. And I'm going to ask you a bunch of random questions, and you have to answer them as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Sure.
What is your spirit animal?
Oh, it has to be the bear. Of course.
Who or what inspires you?
I have to say animals inspire me every day. Scientists inspire me, conservationists inspire me, philosophers inspire me.
Which animal do you think would make the best type of president if the animal kingdom ever rises up and takes over the world?
I would have to say a whale, because they're so intelligent, and we need intelligence in our leaders.
That's great. If you had a superpower of your choice, what would it be?
Oh, I've thought about this for years. I would love to just be able to converse with the animals. I'd love to know what they're thinking and feeling.
I'd like that too. Have you ever been chased by animals? Can you recall one funny incident?
Oh, Kartick, I have been chased by so many animals. I seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time quite often. One that's particularly funny, I think, is being chased. I was actually on a conservancy, and they had a lot of emus there. And we were told by the people who run the facility that it was safe for us to go in and walk right up to them. And I thought, what an opportunity. I've never touched an emu before. And the owner was wrong. He was on the other side of the fence laughing because he knew that we were going to be chased. And I didn't think it was physically possible for me to clear a 10-foot fence, but I managed to do it very quickly, and fell over on the other side. And the emu thought it was hilarious, and so did the owner of the facility. But that was pretty scary.
Do you have a message for our viewers?
I think that I hear so often that people say, well, I'm just one person. What can I do? There's so much that every individual can do to conserve not only animals, but the whole planet, the environment that the animals need to live in. And, recycling is the obvious answer, but just being conscious on a daily basis of what you're doing, what you're using, what you're throwing away, but also getting your hands into conservation. There are ways that even if you stay at home in front of your computer, you can do citizen science on your computer and help people doing census of wild animals in their native habitat. There are things that you can do that don't cost any money. You can also become involved in your local conservation organizations. And even if you can't go out and do something physically, you can help by donating to these organizations. Donate to Wildlife SOS, donate to your local humane society, volunteer at one of those places. There are so many things that every single person can do, regardless of their age, their physical abilities, whether they can just be on the computer or they can go out and become very active. Everyone can contribute. And if everyone would do that, can you imagine how much better this world would be?
Thank you for that, Barbara. It was lovely to speak with you. I hope to see you soon. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you, Kartick. So nice to see you.